as a scientist with a veterinary degree, do you believe that feeding a raw food diet to our dogs can not only be safe, but also healthier than a more ultra processed food such as a kibble?
Uh, that is a totally no-brainer question. And yes, of course, not only do I believe it, but the science that we've been doing really shows that. And it shows it both in studies that are kind of epidemiology, which means that they are based on like big data banks of questionnaires and things, and then also on clinical trials.
Welcome to the safe space where we learn how to train, heal, and feed our dogs better. And today is probably going to be to date my favorite interview I'm doing because we're going to talk about raw feeding and the best optimal dog foods that we can feed our dogs based on peer reviewed, unbiased studies and research with the one and only Dr. Anna Yelm Bjorkman. Welcome so much and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
Yeah, and a little bit about her because I think her background is incredibly important in that she not only has her veterinary degree, PhD, but she's a clinical researcher and leader of the dog risk research group that focuses on the associations between dogs' nutrition and their diseases with a big focus on prevention. Let's talk a little bit about diet and dogs and gut health.
Eating raw food, for example, which has more bacteria in it, which is much more diverse than the dry food, which has all of these different kind of good microbiota, which is like the lactobacilli, which we usually maybe call probiotics and things, that they have them kind of in the food just normally. So this all of these things go together really well and explains why some of the dogs were getting the disease and others weren't. We've been looking at diets for really small babies, and for the mothers, we were just looking like raw against dry, and we had no clue what was in them. But we just know that a raw diet is usually made of fresh fish, fresh eggs, fresh meat products, poultry, bones, cartilage, berries, things like this. Whereas the dry diet is usually an ultra processed kind of kibble diet that is something that comes out of a or box or a package at least, and it has a long shelf life. It doesn't have so much fats in it because then you couldn't have a long shelf
Right.
life. So they're very different. And then again, when we've been looking in our studies where we've been looking at a bit older dogs, then we've been looking at different items like different bone and cartilage, meat separately if it's processed or if it's non-processed, then eggs cooked or raw and things like this. Yeah.
I love that you mention raw cartilage because that's one of my favorite things to feed my dogs as part of their raw
Mm.
meaty bones to it just seems such a powerhouse of nutrients, healthy proteins, amino acids, and so I'm glad that I like that you mentioned that, and I think I've read that in your articles as well that you've seen
Yeah.
benefits from that. Earlier you mentioned sterile foods, and so by sterile foods, do you mean cooking, heating, extrusion, processing?
By sterile, I was actually referring to that there's no life in it, so there's no bacteria.
Right.
And so what happens when you warm up things to over 70 degrees or cook them over 100 degrees centigrades, and or you extrude them when you have like maybe over 250 degrees even, uh, for very short times though. So that means that those are kind of killing steps of pathogens.
Yes.
But at the same time, when they are killing all the pathogens, they are, of course, also killing all the good bacteria. So that means that when we think of what kind of bacteria we give to our dogs to have as cohabitants in their intestines. If you just give them things that are totally dead and have no bacteria, the only bacteria they will actually get is what they eat outside or lick the floor or their own paws, or but it won't come from any food sources. So there are a lot of bacteria that we know that are very helpful for animals, and a lot of them come to us through our foods. And as for example, fermentation is a very good process, and all of these kind of, so in that way I meant sterile. But you're totally right when you said you were talking also about the uh, let's say
The nutrients and the
depletion.
protein.
Yes, totally. So that's kind of a, then they're kind of deficient in
Yes.
all of those as well.
I get a lot of pet parents coming to me saying that their veterinarian was really concerned about them feeding a complete and balanced raw food diet because they're worried, and I know you've done studies on this, about the dog getting salmonella and then getting sick. So, can you tell me some of your thoughts or even findings on this?
Yeah, well, this is actually when we started doing raw food research. I thought that this is where we're going to get a lot of attacks.
Yeah.
And even, I mean, in my own university, in our country, in Europe, in the States, it's kind of the major concern
Mhm.
that are there bacteria in the raw food that could possibly harm either the animal, or then are kind of harm the animal's family, like human family. And so in the first studies we did, we were actually also looking at pathogen both on a kind of a DNA level, and also trying to get them to grow in a lab, like the kind of normal traditional way. And and the only positive we found in our first study, where we had about 50 dogs, I'd say, that were eating raw food for, or half of them was eating raw food and half of them were eating dry food for a period of about 5 months. So at that time, we found one dog that had, I think it was Yersinia or Campylobacter. Can't really remember now, but it's all in the paper.
Mhm.
And this was a dog that was living together with another dog that also was part of the study. So we had two dogs from the same family in this, and we had samples from both of them. And only one of them had this, and they had, of course, been eating the same food.
Mhm.
So although that was, we said in the paper that it's, of course, a possibility that it came from the food, but then we couldn't find it in the other dog. So there's a bigger chance that it's something that the dog had been eating, maybe a dead squirrel in the park or something like that. So that was very minimal. Then we did a very interesting other study that also was replicated later by an American woman, and she wanted to replicate it because our findings were so, let's say, strange and extraordinary. And I think that we all ourselves, when we got the results, thought that this is not really possible. But we it was a kind of a questionnaire study that we sent out over the internet, and we had people from 81 countries answering it, and the kind of the answers were given for 69,000 dog years of risk.
Wow.
So that means that some people had a 10-year-old dog and they said that they've never had any problems. So that kind of gave you 10 years of possible risk for that dog. So in these we had three pathogens that had kind of transposed from the dog or the cat to a human in the same family that were actually found, and that they could find the same bacteria in the dog's poo and in the human. And anyway, it's very unclear if the dog was actually getting the disease from the human or the human from the dog, but actually they both had it. And then we had also many instances that where it was kind of unclear if it was from the dog, but there was kind of a suspicion by either the family member or the doctor that it could have been the dog. And so we did some analysis on all the data that we had, and we had questions about where they bought it and how long they had it, and other family members and their age, and if they were keeping the dog food in the same refrigerator, if they were handling the dog food with the same kind of knives and in the same place, and things like this, just to kind of see where this kind of transmission of pathogens could have happened.
Mhm.
And the very striking results in these both studies were actually that if a dog was eating more than 50% food or of its food as raw, that decreased the risk of transmission. And the other was that if the person was doing the dog food with using the same utensils and in the same place, like in the same kitchen, that also decreased the risk of a transmission between dog and human. And I think that it's kind of striking and surprising in a way, because what we've been doing for a long time is trying to tell people that don't do that don't, mix, don't do the dog's food in your kitchen. We know about 95% of our of people who you do it probably do it, but we try to teach them from a hygiene point of view that not to do that. And uh, on the other hand, it's much more, let's say, again, kind of a no-brainer that this is the results we got. Because if you think about you going to, I don't know, like Indonesia or Africa, somewhere where you don't go very often, and you'd start eating food from street stalls, there's a big risk that you would get sick, whereas the people who live there never get sick.
Right.
And that, there again, we come down to immunity. So
Yep.
when you have something that you get in small doses for a long time, you actually get the immunity up and you don't get sick from it anymore. So it was, yeah, I think it was a shock for the veterinary community, for example, that and I'm really glad we had somebody redo the study, because now we have two studies that actually just show the same results. So it's something that we should kind of think about, and I think that telling people that there actually is no, the biggest risk factor seemed to be that in the same family they had children that were daycare age, and they probably took home a lot of bugs from their daycare.
Well, in a common sense way, it all kind of makes sense and goes back to your other work where you discuss, you mentioned in one of your studies that too clean of an environment
Yeah,
may be detrimental because, as you said, you just don't have both, I guess, imagine for humans and dogs, right? It's you don't have exposure to different bacteria, bad and good, so your body
right.
doesn't learn how to adjust and adapt. And that's what our bodies are meant to do. In our GI system, we're supposed, like, we all
Yeah,
have bacteria in us, around us. I remember reading once that salmonella, there's this big fear around salmonella, but it's really everywhere. Like, there's probably
yeah,
salmonella in my kitchen
totally.
right
Yes,
now.
totally.
And it's not prejudice against kibble. I mean, ultra
No,
processed kibble has, as you've talked about multiple times, like dozens and more, several outbreaks of salmonella.
Yeah.
recalls and everything with kibble. So it's, when people get really concerned, like, oh, or veterinarians even, like, we can't feed raw because it might have salmonella.
Yeah.
One, dogs don't, I mean, isn't this true that dogs naturally have salmonella present in their system
Yes.
already? Like, that's
Yeah.
already there. So almost by how I'm looking at it is almost by feeding them a more sterile diet and having them live in a more sterile environment, they're almost at more risk for disease, atopic dermatitis, you've talked about, allergies, things like that, correct? Potentially?
Totally. Yes, that's very, very, very true. And I think that there was a study that I made that we haven't published yet, but we were doing a study on fecal transplant, and I had to kind of find a very healthy dog with healthy food, healthy poo that we could give to dogs that were very unhealthy in their GI system.
Mhm.
And I had to scan 12 totally healthy dogs that had never been on antibiotics, that had never had any GI symptoms, that were like totally super healthy, that didn't have any pathogens in their poo. And I mean, that's like, I don't know, like it was 1 in 13 dogs I found that was totally healthy that didn't have any of these. So I was screening them for salmonella, for Yersinia, for Campylobacter, for Giardia, for parasites, and it just seemed that all normally very healthy dogs have some of these. And we, as vet students, we're always told that we should be very kind of concerned with, for example, lizards or birds, that they all have salmonella. And that's totally true. And I mean, the dogs walk out in the park where the birds poo, and there you have it. I mean, then it comes into their system like all the time. And there was a really nice study done in Finland maybe 2 years ago, where actually the health of children was shown to be modulated by their dog's microbiota. So it was a study where it was a friend of mine who did a study where they gave this kind of probiotic that was taken from dogs and then given to other dogs for, to make their microbiota better. And what happened was that what they could see, that the children in the families that got actually the microbiota also had positive consequences on their own allergies and atopes. So that's, if you just live with dogs and let them live their life, then you're going to get this kind of good share and small doses of all those small bacteria that's going to make both you and your dog much healthier.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm a living, breathing example of that, I feel like. So, one thing I hear a lot from the conventional veterinary community is, and I haven't seen a study from you on this, but I'd like to get your thoughts about dogs being carnivores versus omnivores, and kind of your thoughts on that. Because my thought and my belief and my understanding, learning, is that dogs are more scavenging or facultative carnivores, not obligate. But I do
Mhm.
hear from uh, conventional veterinarians that no, 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 they've now evolved to become omnivores and can absolutely get up to half, if not more, of their protein from plant sources like legumes or wheat, corn, gluten, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that the way you said it actually shows the total bias of veterinary student education worldwide. So, having somebody that tells you that the dog food can be over 50 or 60% carbohydrates is somebody that is doing foods is uh, that has 50 or 60% carbohydrates. And I don't think that any veterinarian, without having that kind of biased education would really think so. I mean, everybody knows what a wolf or a fox eats. I wouldn't. I'm totally with you. I don't think at all that they're obligative carnivores like cats are. But uh, their main food has to be proteins and fats, and it's actually the only food they need. They have a zero need for carbohydrates, which actually also humans have a zero need for carbohydrates, and that we need glucose, but protein is actually uh, changed into glucose as well. So you can eat, like for example, the Inuits up in that don't have, or actually before there was planes and boats coming around, there was very little kind of green food for them.
Right.
So you can actually be totally a carnivore. You can be on a carnivore diet without kind of suffering, but you can not be on a 100% carbohydrate diet, because the only things that you actually need is fats and proteins. Uh, then again, what I see in my own dogs and in my patients' dogs is that quite often dogs actually like to eat kind of fiber, and I think that this is the same in kind of in human food and in dog food. So if you think about fiber, which I must say is one part of the carbohydrates, and since we don't eat animal fiber, which would be hair and things like that anymore, then our kind of fiber need nowadays comes totally from carbohydrates. So when a food usually has like, let's say between 1 and 3% fiber. I lost you. I don't know why.
I'm not sure what happened, but no worries.
Yeah. I
Okay.
I think it was my internet. My internet isn't the best here, so
No worries. That was so good. So you were basically saying that you were talking about excessive carbohydrate amounts in foods, and that
and fiber. Yeah.
fiber typically used to come from hair and fur, but now it comes from
Yeah.
carbohydrates, maybe like vegetables and fruits.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, so you can ask me a new question
Yeah,
maybe in a
because
minute.
I don't remember. Okay, so I think my question kind of goes a little bit back to these conversations with these veterinarians, that I think that they're well intended, right? And I think because I get a lot of the comments when I talk, I'll show. So basically, I'll show online that I'm feeding my dogs a complete and balanced raw food diet. It's sourced
Yeah.
responsibly, it's human grade, etc. And the feedback I'll get and pushback is, dogs evolved to eat carbs, they evolved to be omnivores. And then they'll come and say, well, I recommend these big five pet food brands. I won't put the brand names here, and that are kibbles because of all the research behind these. And as a scientist yourself, I don't know if you've looked into this, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts of maybe another way we could look at this. Like in my gut initial common sense response is, well, those big, very popular kibble brands have a lot of bias, because they are publishing research articles that are saying that their kibbles are healthy. They do all these science trials, but these are the same companies that are selling these big pet food kibbles. So, as a scientist and researcher, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's really depressing, and I think that it's even worse than you're just describing, because actually what has happened now is that we have these big same you're talking about big dog food companies that they've now bought up nearly all veterinary practices.
Right.
So you have these big chains that are worldwide, and they've also bought up a lot of the diagnostic companies,
Mm.
and so knowing. a lot of my friends who work for these companies or for these kind of veterinary stations that are owned, there's a lot of things that is kind of the state of the art at that company. So it means that you diagnose it like this, you take all these samples, you do it like this, and then in the end you say that, okay, this is what you serve them, that this is the best food for this. So it's really, really sad. But I'm not going to go into that really,
Yeah.
because I think it's something that people have to kind of they have to start voting with their feet against this, both not going to veterinary chains maybe that where you kind of, wherever you go you get this and that kind of therapy, and also this and that kind of advice on nutrition. So I think that what dog risk kind of does, and what we've been trying to do is uh, is kind of opening more doors for the owners themselves to kind of think and do.
Yeah.
So when we've been doing, for example, our research, uh, we kind of give them tools to know which dogs not to choose next time. Like maybe not take a white dog because they seem to be have a lot of diseases. Just probably some of the kind of the those things that make a dog darker, that makes them also more healthy. In some diseases, it might be that they have too short noses, or that they have too long ears, or that they have too short legs, or they have too small skulls. So there's a lot of things that are coming out now more and more about kind of unhealthy shapes that we've been kind of shaping for our own kind of amusement, if you want. And we want to kind of give that back to people, that telling them what risk factors we see there, and then going to the food, kind of showing them that, okay, uh, we've been kind of the first ones to put in the same graph, kind of like the red ones are usually the risk factors, and then the blue or the green ones are those that help or are protective. So then an owner, even if you're not very savvy in research, you can go in and see that, okay, if I give this food, then this is like a 2 or 8 times more risk to get that disease. And if I change to the same food but serve it raw, then I actually protect my dog so that it has like 2 times less chance of, or the other way around. So we give them kind of the p values, which means that it's significant. We give them the risk factors, and we also show them that this happens when you eat this food, and this happens when you eat this food. And very often it's like, okay, cooked meat or raw meat, cooked cartilage and bone or raw cartilage and bone, cooked fish, cooked egg, cooked something or raw the same. And all of these are kind of, we try to make them so easily kind of understandable that the owners can do their own choices, and don't go to the veterinarians and ask, because they're not allowed to tell you anything at the moment, as we speak, in a moment where kind of there is a lot of consensus and dogma, and kind of things that are money driven and not really health driven.
Yeah, and I think what's really valuable, again, I know I said this earlier, but your work with dog risks, and as a scientist with a veterinary degree, PhD, you can really help us as pet owners and
Yeah.
guardians, pet parents, to, as exactly as you said, and something I say a lot, is to become informed with our decisions. And
Yes.
that's something that resonates with me because it's something that I talk a lot about on my platforms, is that I don't want to be in a position to recommend or tell someone what to do or treat or prescribe anything. Instead, I want to present the information I learned from people far smarter than myself, like you, and then allow
Yeah.
people to make a choice that's best for their dog. A quick question on dog food. Another interesting thing is that kibble itself is only about 100 years old. So I often wonder, and think about what dogs ate even before that. Have you ever looked into that, like domesticated dogs?
Yes, I mean, dogs, it was very, very usual that what you gave them was like you do nowadays, you and me and some others is like raw meaty bones. And then they would go and scavenge because at that times we didn't have maybe compost that were totally in plastic and in and out to keep the rats out and the this and that out. So I think that they were just scavenging around even when I was a kid. I mean, I'm just over 60, 61 now. So when I was a kid, dogs were still not kept in leash on leash. They were just wandering around in the area where I was living. They were totally scavenging our backyard, everybody else's backyard behind the local shop. You'd have people that from the shops they just throw out things because dogs would come and eat. And if you were living on a farm, they'd give them, of course, milk and things like that. So I think that the dogs that probably eat the healthiest nowadays are maybe hunter dogs, because very often they are given kind of the both the inner organs and also bones, and maybe even like I said before, like the animal fiber, like so yes, it's very. I mean, dogs were just eating everything, just like we are.
Yeah,
They
they're
were
they're
eating very much more human food.
yeah, they're eating food. We can even take away the human part, and they were eating food.
Yeah.
And then we've kind of spoke about this, but just to make it very clear, you are well. I guess maybe we haven't, but when we think about pet parents who are feeding kibble today, and they want to make improvements in their dog's diet, do you see or believe in benefits of adding pet safe, fresh human foods to the bowl? Maybe replacing some of the kibble with some fresh foods if they're not ready to make the full jump to fresh?
Yes, I often say that I think it's a very good idea to start. And we actually, in our research, we start seeing benefits, like health benefits, already when about one fourth, one fifth of the food, the kibble food, is replaced with raw food. So that's a very good starting point. Also, we have some data that will come out soon that shows that even doing a totally like jump from more or less one day to another, changing the food actually doesn't seem to be very kind of hard on the dog. It might be that what we've been seeing for like the last 50 years is that when you change like one kibble to another, it's maybe not always easy on the body, but changing to a raw food diet, I think that you can do it by going gradually, or you can also do it like very fast, within a couple of days, if you have a reason to believe that this would be very beneficial for you.
Yeah, and we don't have to go in depth on this, but I've even looked into a little bit of one of your studies about uh, raw food and nutraceuticals and how they can decrease the odds of, I believe it was neoplasia, which is
Yeah,
basically
cancer.
cancer, right? And so basically what we can gather from that is potentially is feeding a raw variety diet, not sterile foods, could be
Yeah,
helpful in preventing cancer, which is I would consider an epidemic in dogs today with what are the odds, like 50% chance of odds of a dog getting cancer, over 10 the last time I looked. And I think in under the age of 10 it's maybe 1 in 3 odds, so it's like 6 million dogs a year estimated, that are getting cancer. And so I think it's really incredible and powerful that you've done some work around that, because it not only is it nice to have those resources so that as pet owners we can feel more confident, But I think that it makes us it just allows us to help our dogs live longer, have better longevity, feel better, and that's pretty powerful.
Yes, and actually, by kind of commenting to this, one of the big things that we, of course, would like to get to is the reason why. And so it's really hard when we're kind of looking at one thing at the time. Is that is it really, um, is the raw food better because there's more fat and real animal proteins in it? Is it the quality of the animal proteins? Is it the processing of the animal proteins, or actually the non-processing of them? Or is it maybe that it's not so dry? Is it the bacterial load, that it's better that that it's not so sterile? So what I'm hoping for is to be able to do kind of a really big database where we could look at all these things and kind of uh, go forward, so that we start looking at dogs, let's say now when they're quite young, and then follow them, let's say every 2 years, and see what kind of diseases they get and what they have been eating all around. And the first steps could be just to look at kind of a cohort of dogs that have been eating only raw food versus a dog cohort about the same age, same place, same breeds that would have been eating only dry food. And but to get all this data, actually, one of the things that we really need is money. So that's kind of, it's always a break.
Yeah.
And I think that I mean, we're applying for a lot of money, but as you can guess, we don't really have the veterinary profession behind us. We
Right.
don't also have the dog food industry behind us. And and also, actually, on the human side, it's a bit the same. I mean, people who are ketogenic diet or carnivore diets, they're kind of the oddballs, and they don't get very much money for doing research either. So
Yeah.
it's kind of being kind of on a new forefront, which is really interesting, really super nice to do this research, but it's also, it's kind of struggling. So so that's kind of a thing. I think we, to be able to all these things that I said, that we don't know what the reason really is. I mean, we really need to, I need to get a bigger group, more people around that work on different aspects, so that I can get something more done before I get retired.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Well, I think I know. Well, and I hope you do. And I hope that, making content like this will inspire people because I do have quite
Yeah,
a few veterinary students that follow along. And I think that those individuals could really help spearhead this because I think
yeah,
you bringing this topic up is so important because with all these other big pet food companies that the
yeah,
veterinarians come and say, "Oh, well, they have all this study." I'm like, "Well, they have all this funding." And I always joke that
yeah,
those big 5 pet food companies are probably more than anything the greatest marketers of all time,
yeah,
and that's really what they're great at.
yeah.
So are there ways that we as pet owners can support your efforts?
Well, I'm actually going to England tomorrow, and we're going to try to get some kind of fundraising campaign going for further research. And I really do think that it's kind of also just so that I can keep my research independent and
Yeah,
not kind of uh, mm, so that I don't want to have to say in my articles that this and this and this has been paid by.
right,
So I have the Moomin trolls, which are like a small troll that is kind of a Finnish cartoon. They pay us, and I have a plastic company that make, plastic bowls and things, and so I try to take in uh, sponsors that are not really in the business, just
right.
so that I can keep. So that's why also I think that kind of these ground uh, kind of people feeding their pets that want to contribute with some dollars, some, small dollars. If there's a lot of people, it actually ends up into such a big amount that we can get studies going. So
Well, when you set up the fundraising efforts, if you're, make sure you send that over to me because I'd love to share
yeah,
about it
that
and
would be great.
contribute. And I know we're on time. The last thing I would love for you to share is something I've heard you say that has stuck with me for a very long time. That I think you tell this to your students a lot about being 8.7 million species and what 10 of them eat cooked food or something like that. That I would love for you
Yes.
to say that and share that because it just has always stuck with me and really meant a lot to me.
Yes. So, yes, I do always tell this to my students that you have to remember that there are actually 8.3 million species of animals on Earth, and only 10 of them eat cooked food. So, you have 8,290 whatever species that then actually eat raw food. So I mean, there just can't be any doubt of what our genes are made to eat. And actually, I will put one more thing here, which I think is really nice that you can see in a paper that we did on gene expression that was on atopy dogs and healthy dogs. And that was, I think that also kind of shows very well that when the dogs that were eating raw food, when we saw like what genes were expressed, there was about 90. And when we looked at which genes were expressed in the dogs that were eating the dry food, there was 940. And I mean, this was just kind of a comparison. There's, of course, million more, but these were kind of the ones that came up kind of significantly. And what this actually shows is that when a dog eats raw food, uh, it actually does not have to work. The body, the metabolism doesn't have to change it in any way. It can just use it and make energy and buildings blocks and things that they need from it. When the dogs were eating the dry food and they had to process it like with using 940 different uh, things, so that was like 10 times more of processing of the food for the dog to be able to use it as food. And I think that's kind of it summarizes up a bit like the same thing as with the lot of species, is that our bodies are actually not made to use very highly processed foods, because you have to put most of the energy in just making it readily available for the animal. And then also, as we can see, I mean, the big poop thing that you see in dog parks, I mean, those are dogs that eat. So first of all, they have to work like crazy to use it, and then most of it just comes out because there's such a small amount of that food that they actually can thrive on.
Yeah, I love hearing from pet owners when they switch over to a raw food, how small the poos get, and they actually eventually will kind of decompose themselves. It just kind of
Yes.
I always pick it up, but I mean, if I forget a piece, I'm like, oh, it was there, and now it's gone. So,
Yeah, yeah, totally.
well, this has been a true treat, and I am really honored. I know how busy you are. You're all the way in Finland, so you're so far away, but I'm so grateful to have this time with you, especially for this community. I hope we can do this again because I think that this is going to be extremely valuable, and I hope that we can stay in contact because I would love to continue learning from you and your work. So thank you so much for being here today. And for those watching, please make sure that you subscribe and that you share this with everyone that you know because this is the future of pet food, and this is the future of our pet health. And we have to get this information out there. And it's really on you and I to do that. So please share this, and I hope you guys have a beautiful day. Bye.